Thank you, Lady Mayor. Ladies and gentlemen, my friends, when I was told I was to speak to you about the composers of the Versimo school, I was horrified. To address a gathering of musicians, opera lovers, critics, even friends, on the subject of the yes, critics and even friends on the subject of the great Italian composers of this century that I had the honor to know is impossible. Most of you here know far more about these composers than I do. I could hastily read some of the dry facts about each person, tell you when he was born, what he wrote, and when he died. But you all know those things. Then I was reassured. You knew most of these men, Giovanni, I was told. People don't want to know that Puccini wrote 12 operas, or that Giordano was 81 when he died. They want to know personal stories about each of these men. They want to hear the behind-the-scenes stories, which only you as an artist can tell. With this, I took heart. I was never an intimate of any one of those men. I venerated the older of them. And when I was an established artist, they were established too. We met in course of our work, and then parted to continue other work. Yet, I can tell you a bit about many of them. Some of the stories you may know, some please bear with me. Others, I think you will hear for the first time. Let's start with Puccini, because he was the first great composer I knew, and he was probably the greatest of them all. In 1910 and early 1911, I was singing Verdi's Hernani, my debut, and Marchetti's Ruy Blas at the Teatro dal Verme in Milano. I had been quite successful in both operas, and the word was beginning to get around that young upstart Martinelli may not have had much experience, but he did have a strong pair of lungs. One day, the theater manager, who was also my sponsor, told me that I was to sing an audition for someone. I came out on the stage, looked into the darkened auditorium, and saw no one. A voice asked what I would like to sing. As I recall, I chose Celeste Aida and Cielo e Mar from La Gioconda. When I finished, two men came up on the stage, and my heart stopped. I was only at the threshold of my career, but all Italy knew Arturo Toscanini and Giacomo Puccini. Puccini was then 53 years of age, fairly tall and thoroughly masculine in appearance and in voice. He grasped my hand heartily and said, "Bravo, young man. I think you will do." He turned to Toscanini, who began to question me on my musical training. Then the explanation was given to me. La Fanciulla del West, the girl of the Golden West, had had its world premiere at the Metropolitan the previous year, in 1910, with Caruso, Destin, and Amato. The European premiere of the opera was to be given at the Teatro Costanzi in Roma in the summer of 1911. Eugenia Burzio was to be Minnie, Amato, Jack Rance. Amedeo Bassi was to sing Johnson, the role Caruso had created, but he was available only for the premiere and would have to leave immediately afterward. As a matter of fact, he came here to London for the coronation of the King George V, I think. Puccini and Toscanini were seeking a replacement for Bassi. I was to be the replacement. I went to Roma and started to study the score with an assistant maestro. After some time, Toscanini summoned me. I sang for him. It was all wrong. All wrong. Now I realize you might think that I'm speaking too much of Martinelli and have departed from the original subject of the lecture. But I'm telling you of my own experience, and because of this, I must digress and explain at various times. You must understand that as an embryonic singer, I had been trained almost exclusively in the bel canto school. My first operas were Hernani, Ruy Blas of Marchetti, and a lyric work by Rossini, his Stabat Mater. I had still to learn how to use the art of declamation without, in any way, impairing the lyric line or the long, outstanding legato phrases, which are the very essence and heart of the bel canto school. Dramatic declamation, as found in the Versimo school, or even in the Otello of Verdi, is an entirely different method, and while one can complement the other, it is essential that the voice be set perfectly before attempting such a diversified repertoire, or an unfortunate singer can reach a point where he is unable to sing a line without a wobble or to declaim and stay on pitch. So, when I originally started work on the fanciulla, I knew only the art of bel canto. And except for the phrases, quello che tacete me l'ha detto il cor, or the other more famous, quella mi creda libero e lontano, for the tenor, and really also for the soprano and baritone, Le Fanciulla is made up of dramatic declamation. I found this especially difficult at first, and was more inclined to sing phrases which should have been declaimed. As I said, it was all wrong. The result? Toscanini's reaction to my deficiency. No, 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 he said. This will never do. Very impatiently, he slammed shut the score. This man is too much of a coscritto for me. That is to say, he can make a good soldier, but he is not yet ready for the battle. In short, he meant that I might become a good Johnson for him, but it would take too much time for me to be prepared. We will have to get someone else, he concluded, as he turned away from the piano. My heart sank to the boots. I don't know where I got the courage or inspiration to face him immediately with a reassuring smile. Maestro, I said, Maestro, you are perfectly right. I knew very well the importance of the task when I undertook this assignment. If you feel that I must be dismissed, I will return to my hometown, Montagnana, with sincere serenity in my heart, for, at least, in coming to Rome, I have had a two great satisfaction: to have seen the eternal city, which is a dream of everyone from the provinces, and I always can say I have been a good hour at work with you. This little bit of genuine modesty performed a miracle. Yes, performed a miracle. Amazingly, he began to smile at me. Then he turned to the assistant maestro and gave a direct order to proceed at once with this simpatico giovinotto. Simpatico giovinotto. As he called me immediately, and he honored me with his friendship up to the very end of his life, the last day I was with him. So the performances were given, and all went well. Quite frankly, these Fanciulla Costanzi performances attract directors from many countries, hence my engagement in Monte Carlo, Budapest, Brussels, several cities in Italy, London, and New York. To all of which Puccini came to observe the rehearsals and production details. To tell you more about our Puccini and how much he liked my Johnson, he insisted on having me in the La Scala production 2 years later, even though I did not appear to my best advantage in my first performance of the Grieg in Manon Lescaut with Claudio Muzio at the Teatro dal Verme in Milano, a few months before La Scala Fanciulla premiere. He said to the manager who were on the side whether or not to assign the role to me, he says, never mind. He sang 24 performances of Manon with Muzio, and I was very well pleased with him. As a matter of fact, Puccini came very often to attend these performances, and he told La Scala director, I am satisfied. Martinelli will be the Johnson I wanted. I encountered Puccini on many other occasions. When I was an established artist, he was always warm and friendly. Just a half century ago, he told me that if I continued to sing as I had been singing, I would have a longer career. I hope that he's looking down here tonight to see that this prediction came true. To illustrate Puccini's music would take many, many hours. I have selected 2 discs, which I think you would like to hear. The first is the only known recording of his voice, made in 1907, when he was returning to Italy from a visit to America, where he had attended the premiere of the Metropolitan of Butterfly. The second will be the great soprano's aria In questa reggia from Turandot. I heard all the first great interpreters of this part, Raisa the first, Nemeth in Germany, Rosell and Yaritza in America, as well as other lesser known, but thoroughly excellent artists. For me, there has been only one, your own beloved and immortal Eva Turner. With whom I had the honor of appearing just 25 years ago at the Covent Garden. I'm going to play this solo of Eva's for you, in which she is joined in the IC finale by a veteran tenor trying to get by. Maestro meant to say that he thanks the Mr. Giovanni Viafora of the wonderful line that he sent to him, the public of America from the bottom of his heart, and he said the phrase that he put in the mouth of Lieutenant Pinkerton, the first act of Madame Butterfly, America forever. I guess the riddle. Arrigo Boito was 70 when I first met him in 1912, and to a young man of 27, a man of 70 is a throwback to at least a century ago. Now that I have passed my 70th birthday, I can realize how I must appear to the 27-year-oldsters in this audience. Boito attended one of the performances of Manon Lescaut, which I just mentioned. He came backstage with Puccini, who introduced me to him. Then he asked me if I were preparing Faust in its Mephistopheles, because he thought my voice was suitable for the role. Not yet, maestro, I replied, but I would like to tell you it has already provided an important moment in my career. When I auditioned for my scholarship, after having sung 2 or 3 arias, including Cielo e Mar from Gioconda, and my sponsors were already convinced of my acceptability, they asked me if I had something else I might like to sing. I said, yes, I would like to sing the aria Dai campi dai prati from Mephistopheles, Boito's opera. Good, they agreed. Let's hear it. To their amazement, I attacked the beautiful opening phrase with a pure A vowel, so difficult for any experienced tenor, on the note F. That, they told me, if I had sung nothing else than that, that would have been enough to decide them of my future possibility, and I was deserving a scholarship. I remember last night I explained about the difficulty to place the voice with A vowel, which is an open vowel, on the note F. That means in the passage from the voice from the central voice of the tenor, even for the soprano, I think, to the voice of the head voice that we call voce di testa. And Iva Turner knows what I mean. Boito complimented me and then told me that he had almost finished a new opera and would like, when it was completed, to show me the title role. I was thoroughly flattered and asked its name. Nerone, he said. Come and see me in Padua and we'll go through the score together. I never did get to Padua. And 4 years later, 1916, Nerone was completed. Boito died in 1918. And when the premiere of the opera was to be given La Scala in 1924, Toscanini asked for me. But the manager of the Metropolitan, Gatti Casazza, refused to let me go. So my friend Aureliano Pertile created the part of the Emperor Nero. Boito's music lay between the Romantic and Versimo school. Certainly Mephistopheles in 1866 was ahead of its time. I think Sciarapin's recording of Son lo Spirito, taken from the stage of the Covent Garden in 1926, will give you all a fine idea of the majestic power in the Boito's opera. Leoncavallo, I knew a bit better than Boito. I met him most frequently in the summer months in Venezia, Salso Maggiore, or Montecatini, where I would go for a vacation. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, and in 1918 I summoned the courage to ask him for help in preparing Zaza, which I was to sing the following year at the Metropolitan. Leoncavallo was not well at that time, and was an embittered man since his latest opera, Edipo Re, had also been adjudged a failure. Leoncavallo gave me some perfunctory assistance, but actually I received far more help from Maestro Roberto Moranzoni, who conducted the performance. I then suggested that I would like some help for the Canio in Pagliacci, which I had already been singing. As a matter of fact, I sang my very first Canio at the Covent Garden during my early seasons preceding the First World War. Leoncavallo laughed. Martinelli, he said, you ask me for help when you have the greatest Canio of my dreams at the Metropolitan in New York to watch. Go, ask Caruso for help. I worshipped Caruso, but hesitated to ask such a thing. Apparently, Leoncavallo wrote him about my request, because Caruso invited me to attend his rehearsals. One evening, After a fabulous performance, I went to greet him in his dressing room, and I truly did not know what to say to him. He asked me, "Did you like my cranio tonight, Giovanni?" What can I say to you, Enrico? He honored me asking me, calling me Giovanni by the first name, so he encouraged me to call him Enrico. I answered, "I still have not recovered from my chills." Really, it was a great, great performance. Great performance. Then he asked, "Do you like my costume?" I replied, "I cannot imagine any other costume for a Punchinello like this of yours." He turned to his valet and directed, "Tomorrow, take my costume to Giovanni. It is his from now on." Yes, I received the clean costume the next day. I never wore it, but preserve it as one of my most precious mementos. A fine illustration of Leoncavallo's music is the Pagliacci prologue, which, as I think you will know, was added to the opera after it was completed to afford Victor Morel, who created Tonio, a solo of which he could be proud. Morel did not record the prologue, but Riccardo Stracciari, whom I sang with him in many occasions. And he did record it in 1905. Now you will hear Stracciari record. Beautiful singing. Umberto Giordano was associated with me, or I with him, as the case may be, throughout most of my career. In 1915, I first met him at the rehearsals of Madame Saint-Jean at the Metropolitan, where I sang in the world premiere with Farrar and Amato. Again, in 1922, I met him at the rehearsals of Fedora, and then, lastly, at the performance of his most famous opera, Andrea Chenier. I had not heard Chenier before attend some of the performances at the Metropolitan with Muzio and Gilli. Later on, De Luca and Ruffo took Gerard. Paulselle Redberg the part of Madeleine, and Lauri Volpi and I sang the title role. I first heard Gilli, and I left the theatre thoroughly downcast. Martinelli, I said to myself, how will you ever get the nerve to stand on the stage and sing Andrea Chenier after that glorious flood of sound you have just heard from Gilli? I voiced this doubt to Giordano, who put his arm around my shoulder and said, Gilli's voice is the most beautiful lyric tenor in the world today. If you try to sing the same way, I would say no. But you are gifted with a far more heroic voice. Chenier can be a dreamy poet, but he also can be an heroic figure. Make him that, and you will succeed. Here, let me emphasize how much Versimo there is in this, the first of Giordano's operas, written in 1896. Starting with the baritone soliloquy, Son 60 anni, through the Un dia l'azzurro spazio of the tenor, and continuing with such solos as the Sì, fui soldato, La mamma morta of the soprano, Nemico della patria of the baritone, and even the aria of the little Vecchia Madelon. The opera is built on dramatic recitativi. Only in the lyric line of Come un bel dì di maggio, and in the last part of the duet finale, Vicino a te, does Giordano allow the lyric line to creep into his score. But to return to the composer and what he told me, I took heart and sang as I imagined a patriot would sing, and the public seemed to like this interpretation as well as that of the lyric poet. Now, let me tell you a funny episode involving my first performance, Chenier, which took place in the open air at Ravinia Park in Chicago in the summer 1926. I had reached the point about 3/4 of the way through the famous improviso, in the first act, when suddenly all the lights went out, leaving the stage, the orchestra, and the audience in total darkness. I stopped, and so did everybody. Quickly, the electricians were summoned, and after a brief intermission, the lights went and was restored. Maestro Papi, who was conducting, whispered to me, "Giovanni, da capo." That means all over again, from the beginning. I began the aria again, and had arrived at virtually the same place, and even yes, and even after that, almost to the very end of the aria, when the lights failed for the second time. After they had been fixed, I looked at the pit, hoping that Maestro would have decided to continue the performance, following the conclusion. Not such a luck. Once more, Papi signed, "Da capo." So, I experienced the wildest possible success in my first Chenier. Singing the improviso practically 3 times. Well, I tell you, to this day, I have been unable to decide whether it was the audience's subconscious desire to hear the aria repeated, which caused the lights to fail, or whether the willpower of some distant colleague would have been possible even that. But Giordano's Fedora was almost the last opera I sang. In 1949, I sang my final performance of this work, just a year before I left the operatic stage. I saw Giordano frequently on my return trips to Italy until the war years. I last saw him in the summer of 1948 when he was in his 82 years old. He was amazed to hear that I was still singing and told me he would have to write another opera for an old tenor if I continued to sing. Late that fall, Giordano passed on. One of the most beautiful duets in all opera is the finale of Chenier, Vicino a te. This was recorded superbly in 1928 by Aureliano Pertile and Margaret Sheridan. I will have it played for you now. Incidentally, I helped Margaret Sheridan get established in Italy in 1919, so I have a personal interest on this. Pietro Mascagni was, like Leoncavallo, a somewhat embittered man. He was only 26 when Cavaliere Rusticana gave him world fame, and a success he was unable to duplicate during the succeeding 55 years of his life. He once remarked, "It is a pity I wrote Cavalleria first. I was crowned before I became a king." Mascagni was always changing bits he had written, words, music, anything in the forlorn hope of achieving something better. In this regard, I remember Toscanini trying to persuade Puccini to alter some bits of orchestration in Fanciulla. Puccini was lying in his bed, resting after an exhausting rehearsal, listening to this maestro. I was there. Finally, in impatience, he said, "Basta, basta. La fanciulla è nata con le gambe storte e adesso non posso fare più niente." The girl's been born with bow legs. And now I can't help it, I can't do anything anymore to correct it. It would have been better if Mascagni had followed Puccini's thinking, but this is easy to say when given the chance of a second guessing. I knew Mascagni reasonably well, but I sang very little of his music. When Lodoletta was given at the Metropolitan, Caruso sang it. I sang all the rehearsals, and even the dress rehearsal, but Caruso did all the actual performance. The Mascagni writing is extremely difficult for the tenor voice. Having a high-speaking voice himself, the composer wrote in the same vein, and much of the normal singing lies around the notes of E, F, F sharp, and G, the most difficult note for the tenor. Unless a voice is very well placed, these bridge notes can be destructive. And when I began my studies, I was warned to stay away from Mascagni until my voice was well settled. But when that came, I was constantly being engaged for Pagliacci. So I had virtually no opportunity to sing Cavalleria, though I did make some records of the Siciliana and the Addio alla Madre. On several occasions, I was asked by the maestro to sing Cavalleria and Pagliacci in the same evening, but I never felt that this was more than a stunt, and one which would be too tiring. Mascagni, especially at the end of his life, was a man who was starved for affection and the glory which had been denied him since his initial success. He embraced every cause by which he hoped to attain that fame, and in the end he lost everything, even the respect of those who had been closer to him. At its best, his music was of haunting beauty. I well remember those magnificent performances of Iris at the Metropolitan with Lucrezia Borri and Luca Botta. And now, as an illustration, I will play Borri's Un dì al Tempio from Iris. It is true that I met Saint-Saëns in the late days of his life. This occurred in Buenos Aires in 1916, when the great French composer was already 81 years of age, and still going strong as a remarkable pianist. I heard his concert in Buenos Aires and remarked to him about the wonderful performances of Samson at the Metropolitan with Caruso and Masnauer, little dreaming that in the 10 years I too would be singing Samson. Saint-Saëns, however, did seem to know. He attended a Huguenots performance in which I sang Raoul, and then told me that, while I could not be expected to give the voice of Tamagno had given to Samson, he was certain that in the future I would find the part to my satisfaction. He also made several corrections in Huguenots, which I was delighted to accept. Think, Saint-Saëns had been a friend of Meyerbeer, who had died in 1865, and 51 years later was telling me how Meyerbeer had wanted Huguenot sung. 46 years have passed since that date. No one as yet has written an opera about Methuselah. But if some will do it, I wish I would consider me for a title role. Thank you. And I have you in the audience. I will illustrate Samson with the opening aria of the tenor, Arrêtez o mes frères, sung in Italian by Francesco Tamagno, foremost of the heroic tenors of the last century, and the man who introduced the work first to the Metropolitan in 1894. Enrique Granados came to America in 1915 to supervise the production of his opera Goyescas. Gatti Casassa never could figure out why this work, so simple in construction, took so long in preparation. Certainly, with Anna Pizziu, Giuseppe De Luca, and myself in the cast, it should not have absorbed so much time as it did. Well, this is the reason, and we had to conceal it to our director. Granados was a phenomenal pianist who had written some really remarkable music. Whenever he appeared ready for rehearsal, we, the cast, together with conductor Gaetano Bavagnoli, would crowd around the piano and beg Granados to play. Play he would. And hour after hour of the rehearsal time, Orgoyescas would slip away while the composer would amuse his singers and conductor with other compositions. Then the good-natured Granados would plead with us, and reluctantly we would return to work. He was an exceptional musician, but he was not an operatic composer. He told us that he would write his music first and then try to fit words later, reversing the usual procedure. When he did, he died in the English Channel, his ship torpedoed by the U-boat on his return to Europe. The last World War, and the greatest musician was lost for all of us. I knew Respighi first in Italy, and then already sang some of his compositions. Then at the Metropolitan, where I participated in the American premiere of La Campana Sommersa in 1928. Together with Elizabeth Redberg, we managed to get through the opera, but the tessitura was brutal. It seemed to me that it started on a high B flat and never came down and on persistent declamation in the passage of the voice, the most difficult passage of the voice. Redberg's music was equally difficult, and while we admired the composer and sang his opera at the Metropolitan and then at the Costanza in Roma, neither of us was never very comfortable in the part. I last saw Respighi when I was in Italy in 1934, and it was evident at that time he would not be with us much longer. Very little of his operatic music exists on record. But I will play you an excerpt from La Bella Addormentata, a work first produced in 1909. Italo Montemezzi was also a good friend. He liked my Avito in L'amore dei tre re, and I thoroughly enjoyed singing the part. I remember after performance of the opera with Lucrezia Borri, Montemezzi remarked that Borri and I were like two flaming suns, each burning the other to cinders with the blazing passion of our love. Remember, I'm quoting Montemezzi, not myself. I think we, Borri and I, were able to give as much to L'amore as we did because of the deep feeling contained in the lines by the femme poet Sambenelli, whose words were the basis of the libretto, and for my part, because I had matured sufficiently as a singer to be able to declaim the fiery lyrics of this magnificent Versimo work, without distorting the bel canto lyric line, which was the foundation of my own singing. At any rate, I greatly loved this opera for its vivid realism. To illustrate L'amore, I have chosen the great basso aria, Italia, Italia, from the first act as sung by Ezio Pinza, under the baton of Montemezzi himself. Riccardo Zandonai was just 2 years older than I. I sang in 3 of his operas, Francesca da Rimini, Conchita, and Melenis. Melenis I created at the Teatro dal Verme in Milano in 1912. I remember little of it, except that I was a gladiator who was supposed to enter in the arena with my arms gleaming in the sun. Zandonai was not happy, of course. The fiasco of this opera was really cruel. But several years later, after Francesca da Rimini, he was a much more satisfied man. I sang Francesca in 1914, the year of its premiere at the Covent Garden. I remember that season very well, for we left London in July 31st, and war was declared on August 1st. I never sang in Zandonai's Giulietta Romeo, but the opera is an excellent one, deserving to be much better known. I will play an excerpt for you known as Giulietta Sonio, sung by the initial protagonist Miguel Fleta. The hour is late. I could ramble on about Cilea, Alfano, Franchetti, Wolferari, and even Enzo Camusi, whose Dubarry I had the honor of creating at the Covent Garden in 1913 with Edvina and San Marco. But I had only a casual acquaintance with this maestri. Now I feel that we have had enough of this meandering in the past. Let us declare the brief seasons unofficially closed.